Hello everyone, Tim here. Welcome to another step-by-step demo in watercolor. This time I'm looking at how to get real depth into your paintings by using soft edges. It's one of the best tricks I know for making your scene look a bit more sort of three-dimensional and a bit more atmosphere. We are painting this scene of Looe in Cornwall, UK. A town split in two by the river leading down to the sea. Just off to the left. So we are looking at the far side of the town, or West Looe. Now, you might sometimes find your artwork looks a little bit flat, or maybe things aren't standing out as much as you'd like. In this demo, I'm going to show you, taking this scene, how we can use these soft, lost edges, how they can help get that kind of three-dimensional, get depth into your scene and lose that sort of flat look. We'll take this simple harbour scene, and with a few gentle brush strokes and some wet in wet techniques, make it feel like you could step right inside the scene. Now, you don't need to have been painting for years. Just grab your brush, get your colors ready, paint along with me if you want to. Those of you on Patreon know that you can share your images up on our community, and we can all have a little butchers of that and pass our comments about it. So if you've painted this sort of scene before, you might even pick up a few handy tips for your next go. So let's crack on and look at the scene in a little bit more detail. First of all, what attracted me to the scene? Well, I think it's got the elements that you would normally need in a painting. We've got a foreground and a background, maybe no sort of middle ground. The middle ground would be in the river there. Between the two sides of the town. We are contre-jour, so we're looking into the light almost. My photo was taken late afternoon, and we've got some figures here in the foreground, which I might move around to adjust with the just to adjust and get the composition right and the balance of those figures right. Also, we've got these pillars here spaced out along the near side of this harbour wall, which are sort of mooring posts, I guess, for small craft that are just lurking below us. We can see over on the other side an assortment of different types of buildings, sort of commercial buildings right there on the quayside. So that's the far side there, where you can see some people there up against the railings looking at us. We're looking at them. Or there's a restaurant there. Yeah, so various sort of commercial buildings. And then rising up on the West Looe side, we've got, I guess, more residential buildings, B&Bs, hotels, residential things, and then a few trees there up on the skyline. Framing on the right-hand side looks like some sort of ice cream shop here. Can't really see the menu there. Oh, Mr. Coney or something like that. Would be the shop's name, and a post here, but some nice shadows coming towards us. Fairly plain foreground as well, with that tarmac surface. Some shadows there. Now look at the angle of those shadows. They're going to help us get the perspective right, looking at the angle of them. So, for example, over on the left-hand side, the angle of the shadow is like that. But as we come towards us, it's going to be more going towards the vertical. All right, so that will help us get that perspective right. We've got the light hitting the tops of the figures as well. If I look at this lady here and this lady and the two kids here doing some crabbing, they've got their wires there, trying to fish for some crabs, and then we've got some light hitting the tops of those posts also. And maybe we can get in a hint of a boat or two down there in the river. Not sure if it was low tide or high tide. Anyway, as I say, this is going to be a step-by-step demo. I'll first of all go through my materials, then we'll crack on with the drawing. I'm using Saunders Waterford cold press paper, 300 grams, 140 pounds. Always recommend good quality watercolor paper, probably the most important element of watercolor, followed by the quality of paints you're using, and then the brushes in that kind of sequence. First step then, getting the initial drawing. It's going to be quite a simple drawing, this one. I need to place the edge of the nearby quayside about right in the composition. A slight sort of lean from left down to right, then getting in the distant harbour wall, the top of the harbour wall. And I think what might be quite nice is a gentle slope upwards of those buildings. They are fairly horizontal in my source photo. Well, here's a horizontal here of the top of those buildings on the nearby quayside. But as I go up, I'm going to angle it ever so slightly. I think that might look quite nice as a sort of, in a way, a reflection of the slope on the near side. Just to add a little bit more interest, having that gentle slope. Here's those posts then, equally spaced out, and a little bit of a lean on them, and then thinking about my figures, starting with a couple of children, young kids on the harbour wall doing their crabbing. So a smaller figure and a larger figure. As you can see, I don't really labour over doing the figures. I find sometimes the quicker you do a figure, the more realistic it is, the more effort, for me anyway, the more effort I put into a figure. Sometimes they look a little bit sort of static and staged too much. So yeah, quickly I get that kind of movement and the right kind of pose of the figure as well. Then some adult figures there on the left. So I've moved them in a little bit more to the center of the composition from the left-hand side where they were in the source photo. So we'll have 3 or 4 figures over there to balance the 2 young children, and then my framing on the right-hand side of the ice cream shop, right? So a more of a portly fellow here, balancing the 2 maybe female figures. I'm using a 3B pencil, by the way, so it's soft, but it gives me a fairly hard line, useful for showing up underneath the washes of watercolor, so I can just about see my outline sketch. And it's going to show up a little bit more for the videos like this as well. Now, the all-important angle of those shadows. So fairly, well, going towards the horizontal on the left-hand side. Let's sneak in another post on that left-hand side. Yeah, so fairly sort of horizontal, almost near the horizontal on the left-hand side. But as we come around, they're going to get more and more vertical. That's pretty much the drawing done then. Now, brushes, I'm using a Tintoretto Series 1407, a synthetic mop brush. Got a good point, holds a lot of water as well. I'm going to dampen this top right corner here. Oops, my brush is a little bit dirty, but it doesn't matter. Paint-wise, I'm using professional grade paints from Mark Chapman in the UK. All the details in the description below. And my palette, normal palette, I've got neutral tint at the top, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre there, then spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, this is the cobalt blue, and ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, then light red or English oxide, but it's like a sort of terracotta red, and then cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. Then across the bottom I've got lavender and a couple of gouache paints in the bottom right corner there. Believe it or not, it's a light yellow and a white. Back to the painting then. So starting with this sky, a weak sky in the top right corner, that will dry a little bit lighter. I'm going to be predominantly working with the technique that most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, wet and wet, to get these soft edges. So on this quite wet surface, adding in, first of all, lighter colours, maybe leaving little shapes here and there, the paper showing through. They could be little bits of buildings. The light, as I say, the light is coming almost towards us. Well, over in the top right corner there, and leaving little random shapes, geometric shapes, can help give us the feeling of the light hitting different parts of the building, side of a roof, side of the wall, for example. So doesn't matter. We don't want to cover the whole page here in this top 2/3. I've gone in with an assortment of warms and cools, and we'll go a little bit darker towards the bottom. Now, a tricky bit here are those painting around those posts. I don't need to be too precise here, but painting around those posts, of course, the figures as well. And with my mop brush, with a brush with a good point, it makes life a little bit easier, just following the outline of those figures, continuing over. Now, depending on how dry your atmosphere, your humidity where you're painting, that will determine the speed at which you can work here using wet and wet. And using good quality 100% cotton paper, that does mean that the paper is going to stay wetter longer. You've got a bit more time on your hands to use this wet and wet technique. And you can always, of course, speed things up by using a hairdryer. I probably won't need that here. It's my relative humidity, probably about 50%. I know in talking to some of you are working in really dry atmospheres. I know someone the other day I was doing on a demo, and someone was working with 5% humidity. So things were drying really rapidly. That's where you might need to keep the paper wetter, or you want thicker paper, or you've applied several damp washes of clear water just to make it really wet, or you've got a sort of non-porous surface behind your paper. I know some of you also do wet the paper on both sides. That's another good trick if you are working in very dry atmosphere. Wet both sides and then slap that on your board, and then you've got a lot more time to work with this wet and wet technique. Now the skyline. So these cool green trees over there in the distance. I don't want to go too dark with these trees. There's a good edge there. That's going to be the side of some terraced houses right high up on the top of the hill. But that kind of cool green, and with the surface being quite damp, we're going to get those soft edges. So hopefully the appearance of these trees there dotted up on the ridge. Now I'm starting to go a little bit darker with my paint, and less water as well to paint ratio. I'm often asked about that ratio. Of course, when I first laid down my wash, it was quite watery, so a lot of water to paint. But now, as I'm proceeding, I'm going to go a little bit more paint. You can see I picked up a bit of the gouache. I think it's quite useful here to go or to select colours that are quite opaque-ish, so less transparent, and that can be quite useful to achieve this effect of this kind of misty feeling on that far side. Now, this is the dark wall of that, I think it was a restaurant, that dark building immediately faces us. That's probably about the most prominent building facing us, that restaurant. Not too much detail. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're using this sort of wetting wet technique to get all these soft edges. Ultramarine blue. As regards my mixing, I generally, so I've got three, as you can see with my palette. This is a metallic aluminium enamel palette, and I generally mix the darks in that top mixing wheel, and then generally cools in the middle one, and then warms in on that bottom one. Here's at the top of that restaurant, there's another light bit of rooftop showing through. Leave that unpainted. Might need to go a little bit darker with the roof of that. Now this is the dark wall, and we'll come down to, it's quite nice having these bands in the background of dark light, dark light, dark light as we're going down the far side. I think for me that's quite attractive. And we've got the restaurant here facing us is quite dark, and then we've got the light top of the wall, the harbour wall, or I guess it's the quayside on that far side, and then it goes dark again down to the very bottom, dark again, where we can just see a few craft tops of boats just bobbing there in that middle ground area. So that's the start here of my light wall, that sort of grey, opaque-ish colour. Use a bit of lavender for that. And then just a case of now strengthening things up. You can see the shine on the surface, so you can just about see that this is it's still quite damp. But as I lose the shine, then it's sort of going into the damp stage from that sort of moist stage to damp stage, and then, well, quite rapidly after that, it's going to go dry, and then I need to be very careful. Need to work quite quickly here. In with the darks of the far harbour wall, again painting around the posts to the two kiddies, and continue over to the right, up to another post, down to the near harbour wall, continue along. Doesn't matter if I leave little bits unpainted, they can be bits and pieces catching the light or a little bit lighter on that far side. Now I've got a bit of a light area here, not sure if I'm going to keep that, but we'll go with it. A bit like when I'm doing my figures, trying to not think too much about these shapes can often sometimes give you fairly pleasing results as regards the impression of those buildings on that far side. Bit of the complication with some of these buildings is that they've got these sort of gable, I think they're called gable windows in the roofs, and they're sort of, well, really they're sort of triangles on the roof. So we'll just give a hint to that, and with the light coming from the right, there might be a little bit of light on the right hand side of those triangles. Now I've got a flat brush now, and this is a 1/2 inch Raphael soft aqua brush, and I find this is quite nice to get a bit of a hard edge. Of course, with this brush, I'm not holding as much paint as I was with the mop brush, so I'm going to have to apply it quite thick. And yes, it does give me quite a nice edge. You can see I just defined there a little bit of a triangle of those rooftops. That second row down from the top. A few darker trees behind those distant buildings. Just define now the roof of the restaurant, that left-hand side, bit of an angle, almost a 45-degree angle of that, and then there's a dark band between, well, a sort of dark, I think, retaining wall behind that restaurant as it goes up to the next level of houses. Warmer colour here, and just these geometric shapes to try and create the impression of, they're actually a little bit more complicated, a little bit more tricky. The buildings to the right of the restaurant is fairly easy. It's just a sort of rectangle in a way. Now, some darker ground level or first floor ground level buildings. Use my fingertips just to help things along as well, and also to test how damp the paper might be. Define the very bottom of those buildings a little bit more with the side of this flat brush. And so burnt umber, neutral tint. And you can use the corner of the flat brush as well, just to get a different brush shape, but mainly it's flat on the paper. Keep going across. We can leave little verticals here and there. They could be little, well, on the other side there will be these poles, posts, structures, vertical structures on that far side there, just catching the light. Back to my mop brush. And the light tarmac surface in the foreground, and with my, so there's a very light band just right by the water's edge, by the side of the quayside there. Now, we've got some dry brush marks here, but I've got a fully loaded mop brush, but quickly dragging across the rough or fairly rough surface of the paper, we're going to get that sort of deckled effect, and that angle will help us with the perspective, and might just give us a little bit of the feeling of light coming into the scene as we're looking almost into the light. Little bits of the tarmac, shiny surface, just catching the light there. So it's gradually taking shape. Now on to my third brush, a small synthetic round brush. Again, a fairly good point, and try and get in some details now of the distant buildings. The paper is a little bit drier, but I'm still going to get a tiny bit of a soft edge where the paper's not 100% dry. Depending on how thick I go with this paint, that will give me, again, a different edges. So if I've got a little bit more water on the brush, then I'm going to get a soft edge on this damp surface. But if I go quite thick, then it's going to be a harder edge. And just really a few random, not painting in every single window. When you look at the source photo, you can see that some of the windows stand out a bit more than others. Some are darker, some are lighter, some are even blue. With the light coming with the light coming towards us and this side of the town, we're in Eastleigh, maybe there's a bit of reflected light bouncing back over there, so there could be some lighter windows. So just the impression of a few shapes over there. We don't want that to be the main attraction. The main focal point will be the figures and them catching the light and a balance of those figures in the foreground. And I'll be going back to the background continually as I go through. We'll be going back to there a little bit later on. Right. Neutral tint. Going quite dark. I need to just define the edges of these objects a little bit more. And some stronger horizontal lines as well. Could be a bit of shadow underneath the edge of a roof. Could be a little bit of architectural detail, but those lines will strengthen, as I said earlier, that sort of angle of the far side there as it goes, as we rise up, the angle gets a little bit more. But using this small round synthetic brush just to try and emphasize some of these horizontals and verticals. As I'm going through, I'm just really using my source photo as a bit of inspiration, maybe squinting my eye. I sometimes find when I'm copying from a photo, if I have the photo quite small in size, if I got it on my screen, on my PC or a secondary monitor, then keep it quite small. Then I'm not really attracted to any of the details, and I'm going to be a little bit more economical with my brush marks and keeping it fairly loose. Yeah, I think I just need to glaze over that light area, that white area there on the right. Flat brush and neutral tint, ultramarine blue. Go a little bit darker with that retaining wall behind the restaurant. And the side of the roof catching the light. I suppose in a way that might be a little bit of a focal point, that light hitting the right-hand side of that building. Right, we'll be on the figures shortly. Really, apart from some whites and lights on that distant side, I've got to keep working on while the paper is just still a little bit damp, just keep working on it to get it right before I proceed with the figures, the pose, the shadows. Figures then, I normally start with a little bit of flesh colour, faces. Well, it's summertime, so they've got summer clothing, so we can see some bare arms and legs wearing shorts. And I normally start off with the faces first, then a couple of arms, face, and then arms as well. With the children, I think I might go with this darker colour for their shorts, trousers. Of course, with a group of figures, you want to try and not have them all with the same sort of clothing, and try and just alternate them a little bit. So some might have lighter tops, darker bottoms, then vice versa. For others, maybe I'll go a little bit of a stripy number for one of these figures. Here's the gentleman on the right hand side. Maybe he's got some blue shorts, so cobalt blue, or mainly cobalt blue. Stripe vest for that figure, and we'll keep that figure with the striped top. We'll have that one have some light shorts. Maybe this lady's got a dress and legs coming down to the ground. Then the stripy figure, some legs, and then guy on the left, some legs, forearm. Little bit of a darker top for the older child, and darker trousers. I'm pretty much following the brief drawing I did of these figures, but sometimes I change the configuration of the legs just a little bit. And also with figures and with my application of my brush marks beforehand, sometimes there can be little marks or little areas of the paper unpainted that can present themselves to make them into figures to, for example, a little bit of light hitting someone's shoulder or the top of their head. Right, posts and that sort of light wood colour, leaving a little bit of light, hopefully a little bit of light on the right hand side. Doesn't matter if I don't have that light, I can, towards the end, I can go in with a tiny bit of white gouache just to strengthen any highlights. But hopefully this is the colour of that lightish timber. And then we've got one sort of in there. Well, they're fairly equally spaced. Shadows then, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, little bit of burnt sienna, keep mixing, cobalt blue. They're sort of, well, you've got to get the value right of those shadows, and they're sort of a similar value to the distant harbour wall, and just angling them down. So I've got to try and think now. I haven't drawn in all of the shadows, but I'm trying to think about these angles, and as we come closer, or as we move over to the right, they're going to angle down a little bit more. Tricky one there, the post, just the shadow from that post connecting with the group of those three figures. Now over the halfway area, and then angling down just a little bit more, and our children. The length of the shadow is also quite important, because, as I said, we're late afternoon, not sure exactly what time, but it's the sort of height of summer, and we've got those, as the sun is setting, fairly long shadows. And also connect the shadows with the figures as well. That's a very important point. Connecting the shadows with the posts. And sometimes it can be quite good just to have a kind of soft transition from the light of the post to the shadows. So it's not too harsh. Here, there's a sign, I think, for the ice cream shop, but it's just another object that's filling in that right-hand side. So it's a little bit more interesting than just the side of the building. And it's connected to the ground. Then think about the angle of the shadow, maybe just a little bit wider, closer to us. And then there's bits and pieces going over to the right, connecting with the building. Ice cream cone at the top. I think it's an ice cream cone anyway. I've gone with cadmium orange, and then just a vertical drain pipe or something coming down from that. Now quite dark on this right hand side. This is in the shade and not black, but just some colour. I've gone with a fairly cool red colour towards the top, and try and get the edge of this wall parallel with the right hand side. It's pretty much there. Might have gone a little bit narrow at the top, and then we've got some more posts coming down, drain pipes or something or other, and those shadows coming out from those. Think about that angle again. You can see almost going vertical. The shadow now is, so I did the shadow immediately after the wall, and I've got that soft transition from the wall to the shadow. So again, it's not like a harsh lightish wall and then the shadow. They're kind of mixed together. Bit of lavender and some white gouache to get some of those poles attached to the far side of the harbour wall. Not sure what material they are. Maybe more of a sort of seasoned wood. Perhaps that sort of greyish colour that wood goes when it's aged and weathered a bit. Now a little bit lighter here with white gouache, just to define a few lines on that far side, not too many, horizontals and verticals, just adding a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of interest to different things going on there over on that other side. Top of the boat as well, that's in that middle area, and it's moored up against, it's attached to the other side of the river on that far harbour wall. Quite simple, top of the boat, little cabin in the middle, and then the bow. A few lighter windows as well, as I explained. Could be the light hitting or bouncing against this side of the town and then going back to the far side. And it could be some light blues in here as well. Light blues, whites. Just varying them a little bit. And then some blue for some windows as well. A little bit of a line here, which is not really, it's not too evident in the source photo. I think there's some bunting or a line of flags or a cable above us, and that's a sort of soft shadow. But I think it's quite a nice line that is at that angle again. So we've got these different angles radiating, if you like, up the scene, and their angle changing a little bit. Strengthen up some of the flesh colour of the figures. All the reds there, few buoys or fenders, something, there's some sort of red objects on some various craft in the river. Now I'm just squeezing in a fourth figure. I didn't draw it in, but I just felt that needed something in there, just to fill in that space of a figure walking down the quayside, and then a strap for that lady's bag, just to find a bit of shadow behind the arm of that left hand figure, and a little bit of shade. And darker hair for the children. Some arms for the smallest child. I'm going to use my hairdryer just to make sure the far side is 100% dry. Yeah, it's a little bit damp, so speed things up with the hairdryer just to get that. You can see it's just still a little bit damp. There's a bit of a shine on the surface. Get everything nice and dry so I can get in some harder edges. Now, not really interested. We've gone past the wet in wet stage. We're now wet on dry. Dry up this right hand side as well, so I can put in some architectural details or some lines on this building on the right. Even if they don't exist, it does help just defining a few lines here, that angle there for example, and then next one down, a little sort of inset here on this right hand side. Not too much detail, but just a few lines just to help with the perspective and leading the eye in, like here at the bottom, leading the eye in. So the angles at the top, mirror image of the lines at the bottom. Just a few more brush marks. Strengthen up the bottom of that restaurant on the other side. And there's a sort of line just on that lighter band there. Get that one in. Just another element of detail. Could be railing. bottom of the railing, something like that. Bit of shadow behind those posts on that far side. There we go. I'm going to use now a smaller brush, tiny brush, and some white gouache right out the tube. The brush is a little bit moist, so I can pick up the thickish paint more easily, and then just applying it neat on this now dry surface. Just a few lights there on that far side. A few little dots here and there, fairly random with my placement of those dots. Not too many. Bit of light on a horizontal surface. But I do need to strengthen up these posts. They're not really standing out. I want them to get that nice light against the darker background. So a little bit of paint on the top of the post, and then down that right hand side where I've inadvertently gone over the lighter side of that. And then now as I'm coming closer to me, a bit more for these figures, particularly light hitting the tops of the figures. So think about the direction of the light, the tops of the figures, their shoulders as well, bits of their bodies facing towards the sun, and the front of that guy, and then the children, head, shoulders. And the smaller one. Bit more light. I need a bit more light on that cabin of that boat as well, just to make it a little bit more boat-like. It's not bright. Well, it's down there in the shade, so it is a white top, that boat, but of course it's not. It's like a dull white. A few verticals, aerials, something or other, particularly on that retaining wall, and some of the tops of the rooftop, some of the rooftop areas catching some light. Now you can see I'm beginning to ever so slightly hesitate where I'm going to put the next mark, and that's probably it's an early sign that I'm nearing the end of the painting process. These little marks here where I just really don't know to put the next mark. Let's give this guy a bit of a cap, peat cap. I think that would be very appropriate for a summer type scene. Need to be careful here with the peak of the cap. Bit of light on the right hand side of the figure. Just a few finishing touches, and we're done. As I normally do then, just a little bit of a self-critique of my painting towards the end, and try and analyse what I think went quite well, or maybe areas that could have been done a little bit better. On the whole, I'm fairly pleased with the result, achieving that sense of depth by going in with the soft edges on the distant side of the town, on the other side of the river, and getting those soft edges using that wetting wet technique. So we can see some nice soft edges appearing, particularly on the skyline there with the trees. Maybe went in a little bit too thick there. We can see that brush mark appearing there. Not so sure about that. I've also, off camera, I went in with some additional, I've got a white acrylic pen, and that can be quite useful just to not overdo it, but just some of these marks here. For example, that one there, that one there, that one there. This is done with an acrylic pen, one there. Just a few to strengthen up that light hitting the right-hand side of those gable windows. But the focal point had to be these figures catching the light there. So fairly happy with those figures, with the two children. Not so, yes, maybe their head there might be just veering on a little bit too large, but then they are children, so the relative size of their head to the body will be a little bit larger. Three figures here, the two female figures, or two adult figures here. Quite happy with those, especially that. I think the stripe guy came out quite well, if he is a guy. Maybe with the left-hand figure, his right arm doesn't look quite right. So his arm the back of his arm is sort of there, whereas it should be really a little bit further back, maybe somewhere like that. So his arm would be more like that. So I might have gone a little bit too far forward with the arm, but it's okay. I mean, the main object of the exercise is trying to use that wetting wet technique and pushing that far side of the town away. If I hadn't have if I'd have gone in with hard edges on that far side, it would have detracted from what was going on this near quay side, with the posts and the lights around the figures and these dark shadows, the angle of those shadows as well, which is quite pleasing. Would I change anything else? Not so sure. Maybe possibly get in some more figures. It was quite a busy day. There are more figures in the source photo. Possibly being a harbour scene and the river here, perhaps get in the tops of some more boats. But again, you've got to be very careful not putting in too much detail in that middle ground area, and it detracting from the focal point being these figures. Yeah, quite happy with that figure there. Yeah, and we got the sort of boat there and little blobs of red for those boys in that middle ground area. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the process there and my little demo of Lou, looking at West Lou from East Lou. Have a go yourself. Certainly, those of you on Patreon, love to see your paintings from this effort. Thanks for watching. Catch up with you soon on the next one. Bye-bye.